So thank you to everyone for 200k subs. For something a bit different today, I thought we'd showcase my Tau army with some very blue crisis suits. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're doing a 200k subscriber special. It's been a while since we did some of these. I think the last one was the 100k showcase of my Imperial Knights. This time I thought we'd take a look at some of the Scions of the Greater Good, and I'd talk through my small Tau collection and how it came about. My Tau army dates back from 5th edition Warhammer 40k. It does feel like it's a bit more of a historic force than a current one, to be honest. A small force of battlesuits with a bit of armoured support and some alien auxiliaries, and I'd say as my armies go it's perhaps one of my better painted ones. With relatively few models I did try and keep quality a little bit higher than most for me. My main armies in Warhammer 40k have generally been Imperial Guard and Space Marines, though I have always quite liked the aesthetic of the Tau. Lots of clean slick armour plates and stylish futuristic weapons. There is something quite fun about their boundless dynamism within Warhammer 40k, endlessly innovating and coming up with new technological solutions to match up with the alien horrors that they're fighting. And because it's Warhammer 40k, of course, all with a vaguely sinister undertone of Ethereals mind controlling the entire race. This army is generally from quite a long time ago, barring a few small updates that happened in 9th edition. The majority of the force hails from 5th and 6th edition, where the kind of rules inspiration for this one were to create a Farsight bomb type list, a list that you could make with Commander Farsight leading up an enormous block of crisis suits, and then give them all sorts of buffs to give them some horrendous firepower and bounce them around the board killing things. It seemed like quite a fun way to play and very different to the other armies that had tried out before, and perhaps an army that was maybe a little bit more achievable than some in Warhammer 40k. You don't really need all that many models to pull it off, and at that point I was doing quite a bit of eBay trading, buying and reselling Warhammer online, and I did have a fair amount of crisis suits that I could just repurpose towards this, so it wouldn't really cost much. In general, the force has been a bit more of a painting project and a casual army that I've played a fair bit over the years, though it's never really been played competitively. It's not really quite at 2000 points level even now. Painting and modelling wise, this was definitely a step up my game on quite a lot of armies that I'd done so far. This was the first army I'd done that I experimented with a bit of a zenithal highlight type thing, and rather than any sort of time-saving airbrush, this was done kind of the hard way, just by brushing on different colours of blue to the different facings of the armour plate. On all the top facing bits there's Lothern blue, really quite a lighter shade compared with the Teclius blue that's on the side facing plates, and it's much darker underneath for anything facing downwards. Over that it's all edge highlighted and shaded in the recesses. Tau armour really does respond quite nicely to that, I think. All the metallics are quite shiny, and I'm quite pleased with how they came out on this army. I've got some set markings in yellow, as I thought it contrasted quite nicely with the blue. They're painted in freehand with white strips and then gone over in yellow to make sure they actually stand out properly. And I was at least fairly pleased with how I did the base on these guys. A whole load of rocks found from the garden or outside, super glued onto the base, sand fit in between it, and then the base is achieved by a dark brown paint, and then a light greyish brown dry brush over that. I do quite like the mid-tone over the dark brown, I think it looks quite realistic. The rocks are all highlighted a little bit in lighter grey, and then there's some patches of flog in between, again to make a nice natural light contrast, which I think works well with Tau, to be honest. At the time I was coming up with this, I was playing in a campaign involving my Imperial Guard. I thought the Tau could be some bit players in it. The army's name is Task Force Blue Sky, and it represents a Tau expeditionary force meddling in an Imperial civil war on a nearby planet. The campaign was set on the dystopian world ruled over by my Imperial Guard regiment, and a rebellion against their comically authoritarian rule. The Tau, seeking to expand their prospects with limited resources, were operating in a small cadre of battlesuits to do rapid insertion missions to take out targets of high value, and then use their excessive mobility to get out of the area before the Imperial war machine got mobilised properly. As for fighting style, I wanted the army to be basically almost entirely battlesuit based, a very elite force of experienced battlesuit pilots who operated a bit like warrior monks. Before battle they would enter a nirvana-like state with meditation, mind-altering stimulant substances, and they would enter the fray with blazing music playing in their headsets and their suits, crisis suits bounding through the enemy, reaping a bloody tally on their enemies. The result supposedly is spectacular combat prowess, but somewhat hard to control warriors once they're engaged, but the boost to their fighting prowess was deemed worth it. Going through the units in the army individually, first up of course we have a hefty contingent of crisis battlesuits. These are very much the old style models before the slightly fancier new kit came along, I believe sometime in 2015 or 16. Maybe not the most enormously different models in the world, but perhaps these ones' poses are a little bit less dynamic than the newer ones, I think. Recently in 9th edition I decided to try and revisit the army a little bit to make it a bit more playable with the current game. and I bought some base extenders to try and fix the base size, as the new kit had a larger base. I think I managed to make it blend in kind of okay with the older ones, considering the amount of effort I put into them, at least compared with some of my other armies. Also, when I was first assembling these, it was one of the first times that I used magnets in Warhammer 40k before. I probably overused them if anything now, but before I just hadn't really seen it as worth the time or effort. It meant that for these crisis suits, I glued in really quite a lot of their weapons, but I did at least put one magnet port on their shoulder pads and things. You can see a few of them here, say the top left shoulder of the crisis suit on the left. Recently, while I was redoing their bases, I decided to make this a bit more extensive, rather painfully snipping off all the weapons and trying to drill in some magnets for each of them. At least they're a bit more flexible now. I think at some stage I'll have to get round to painting up a huge batch of crisis suit guns at some point, so I can actually have a few more loadouts that make sense. At the moment these guys are pretty fusion blaster and missile pod heavy. Back in 5th or 6th edition, I think it made sense to have one crisis suit carrying a whole load of buffs for the unit, so basically not having any guns but have him to amp up the unit's firepower. I converted this guy to represent that, giving him a boosted aerial on the side of his head plus a little scanner drone thing. I've attached that to him with a bent paperclip painted black, and it can slot on and off. Now I have magnetised everything. He can be armed with a couple of guns now. Previously he didn't have any. You can see he's got a couple of fusion blasters on his arm and shoulder now. They can be swapped in and out. Otherwise, I was quite pleased with the posing on this guy on the top left here, with the missile launchers and some fins and scanner packs on the side. I quite like the idea of him having two fist-mounted missile pods, and the one on the bottom right I've got so he could represent Farsight if I wanted to. I don't think it's actually made from the original Farsight model. I just seem to have a Dawn Blaze lying around from a previous kit. I did occasionally use it to play as the Onager Gauntlet as well, if I wasn't running Farsight. Overall, I'm quite happy with how the crisis suits came out. I think that this was one of the last batches of them. As I mentioned, they were very fusion blaster heavy at the time. It was one of the better weapons originally, but now it's maybe a little bit more out of favour compared with plasma rifles and cyclic ion blasters. I feel like if I can just get round to painting up a few more weapons, they will be really quite flexible in game. Here's just a shot of them with the weapons taken off. I feel like they've got quite a lot more opportunity now. It would be kind of nice to be able to swap out the multi-trackers for things like shield generators. I feel like that might be something I'll struggle to actually make look good though. They are mounted by just quite a thin bit of plastic. I can't help but think that it would look a little bit obvious if they were magnetised. Otherwise, the only actual troops that I've got for the army are these Kroot mercenaries, just a squad of 10 of them at the moment. They were pretty fun miniatures to paint. I went for a grey skin for the actual mercenaries, and then went with a similar sort of philosophy in terms of greater light on the top surfaces. These guys have one shade of paint as the light grey on the top, and then another for anything that faces sideways, and I tried to blend in between. I'm not honestly sure if I'd have the same amount of patience to do all that with a paintbrush these days. It's probably kind of overkill compared with the result that you get. They are quite fun miniatures though. One of the other Tau units that I do own to actually paint up at some point is a second squad of these. I think it would be kind of worth it going forward for an investment in the army. Plus actually getting some Fire Warriors at some point wouldn't be the worst idea for changing rules. Another bigger unit for the army was this Skyray missile defense gunship. I think that this one was fairly beaten up when I first got my hands on it. I think I actually paint stripped this one, and then I had to repair this scanner thing at the front, as someone had assembled it with a burst cannon which you couldn't actually take on the model. I tried to be a bit more bold with the yellow sept markings on this one to give a little bit more contrast. I feel like perhaps I could have gone a little bit heavier on the spot colours. A lot of the army does seem to be just very extreme blue, and maybe a bit more yellow or white might have helped with that. I don't really have all that many drones in the army. These are the only 6 that I've got. 2 missile drones to go with the broadside, and then 4 gun drones that would likely run with the battlesuits as ablative wounds. If and when I go back to these, I might magnetise the flying bases. These ones do tend to drop out an awful lot, and are kind of annoying as I'm playing. I guess in de facto control of the army is an Ethereal. My theming for the army wasn't exactly supposed to be an army from the Farsight enclaves or anything, more just a mainline Tau army that was using the Farsight rules from 5th or 6th edition or whatever. I did happen to have a spare Ethereal lying around from an eBay lot, so I decided to paint him up. He's one of the older ones with the symbols of the office, a metal Ethereal this guy is. I'm not sure it's my favourite miniature in the collection. I feel like the yellow's a little bit on the dark side. I needed to do something to try and make it contrast with the white cloak. One model I did have quite a lot of fun with though was this Broadside. At the time I was a bit unsure what to make of him, seeing as I really quite like the rules for the high yield missile pod, but I more liked the look and feel of the heavy rail rifles. As a result, I decided to go for a combination of the two, basically use the gun and barrel of the heavy rail rifles, and then just use one of the high yield missile pod bits to be the end of the gun, and then just represent him as having the high yield missile pods as his loadout, plus a bunch of smart missiles. I'm fairly pleased with the result of it. I think it came out okay. I must admit though, broadsides do feel a bit expensive for the amount of them that you might want to run in an army. And I was kind of irritated that I couldn't find an easy way to swap out between the missile pod and the rail rifle. I think it's just kind of hard to do. Overall, I'm pretty happy with this guy though. I think the conversion came out okay. Finally, for the main model showcase, the Riptide is definitely the model that took the longest out of any of these by quite a long way. I remember working on this guy for really quite a long time. He's very much not magnetised or anything, he just has the ion accelerator, not the burst cannon, and I chose to give him the fusion blasters at the time as well. I guess at the moment the ion accelerator will genuinely be quite a good choice. I suppose I probably want something like the smart missiles or plasma rifles instead of the fusion blasters though. I was pretty pleased with how the base of this guy came out, really quite a lot of great big rocks there, and I feel like they dry brush up pretty nicely. It does mean that it's a pretty weighty model though, the base is definitely a lot heavier than the main model is. During 9th edition I have actually bought a few more kits to try and expand the army for. I think it will be quite nice to get it towards an actual 2000 point playable level, even if it might not be the most optimised tower force in the world. The kits that I picked up for that are an actual commander kit to lead the force. I wouldn't mind having a Cold Star commander on the books, plus another couple of broadsides as friends for the regular one. I've got another 10 Kroot to paint up whenever I can get round to them, and then raiding my bits box for as many Tau guns as I've got. I've tried to get together a few more burst cannons and plasma rifles and things, so I'd have a bit more flexibility with the armament of the crisis suits. At the moment, all the guns that you've seen are the ones that I've got, so I don't really have much flexibility of how to arm them. I do have a few more 3D printed guns as well, some generic energy weapons to represent some cyclic ion blasters. Again, it would be nice to have a few options for those. I'm not entirely sure when I'm going to get round to them. I think they're probably going to remain a fairly casual army going forward, to be honest. I try and stay a bit more current with some of the others. I think for these guys I might just keep on adding a little bit here and there, and trying to make sure that I really quite like the look and feel of them, rather than trying to paint too fast and get burnt out or anything. In any case, look forward to hearing your thoughts on the army. I thought it was high time that we had another one of these showcase things, seeing as it's been a while since I did the Knights one. In any case, hope you've enjoyed having a quick look at my Tau army. If you'd like to see a similar sort of video to this one for the Imperial Knights, I'll leave that links down in the video description below. Otherwise, just a massive thank you for getting the channel to 200,000 subs. I guess I'll see you for another one of these when we hit another milestone like this. Maybe 300k for the next one or something. In any case, an absolutely massive thank you for listening. If you have been enjoying my videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that links down in the video description. The channel's Patreon page is what allows me to keep on making videos like this as my main thing here on YouTube, and if you have been enjoying, then any support is enormously appreciated. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.